We got time.
He was kidding.
He was kidding.
I'm not.
Oh, God.
It looks like we did not choose correctly. After all, there have been no humans on Earth when the global average temperature was 3.5 degrees C above baseline. 2 million years of the human experience, all at less than 3.5 C above baseline. Baseline meaning the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. We're headed for more than 3.5 C above baseline in the near future. Human extinction will not result because we're not clever. It's not as if we can't handle temperature swings. We came from outside to inside that's way more than 3.5 C. That's closer to 10 or 15 C. That's not the issue. The issue is habitat. We're human animals, and as with all other animals, we need habitat to survive, and that habitat has to include food. And it's difficult for me to imagine a world in which we'll have food for humans at, say, 3.5 or 4 C above baseline, especially in the relatively near future that will bring us that 3.5 or 4 C. John Davies, writing for the Arctic Methane Emergency Group last September, concluded, based only on carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, that the world is probably at the start of a runaway greenhouse event which will end most human life on Earth before 2040. He's only contemplating one greenhouse gas, carbon dioxide. And as was reported by NASA a couple of days ago, we're at carbon dioxide levels that are likely higher than they've been for the last 20 million years. 2 million years we've had humans on the planet. We're at nearly 400 parts per million carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. At the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, we were at 280 parts per million. So this is a huge change in atmospheric chemistry. If we include some of the self-reinforcing feedback loops associated with the so far 0.85 C rise in temperature, instead of, as John Davies did, which is to ignore those and focus only on carbon dioxide. If we include some of those feedbacks, according to Paul Beckwith, climate scientist at the University of Ottawa, we're headed for 6 C within a decade. 6 C from the current level. About a year later, Beckwith doubled down, double and a half. Said we can expect up to 16 C increase within a decade or two. And he's basing these projections on paleoclimatic information. So, for example, according to Science, one of the more reputable journals in the scientific community, climate change is on track to occur 10 times faster than at any time during the last 65 million years. Within that 65 million years is an event 55 million years ago, which saw a 5 C rise within 13 years. Global average. 10 times faster than that is 50 C rise in 13 years, or maybe a 5 C rise in 1.3 years. Either is enough to remove habitat for all humans on the planet. It's happening, and a lot faster than most people think. A little bit more evidence, according to a paper in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, one of the premier journals in the world in science. From 5 years ago, we will remain at or above the current carbon dioxide level for at least the next 1,000 years. We're at 396 parts per million carbon dioxide right now, and we'll be at a minimum of 396 parts per million for at least the next 1,000 years. Contrast that with the message of 350.org, which indicates we'll get down to 350 if we just use a civilized approach to it by mid-century, the middle of this century. That's not going to happen. It can't happen. It's physically impossible. But 350.org is not going to tell you that. According to the United Nations Environment Program, during 2008, the most dire year of the Great Recession. Remember when we started calling them recessions because Prozac Nation can't handle the word depression? I mean, it was a Great Depression, wasn't it? It was great for me. I don't know about you. That was awesome. In any event, in the most catastrophic year of the Great Recession, global carbon emissions actually increased to their highest level since we enacted the Clean Air Act in this country in 1980. But that was nothing compared to 2009, when carbon emissions increased to a new record-setting level. And then 2010, when they exceeded that previous record-setting level. Likewise for 2010, 2011, 2012, and we just found out 2013. Every year, every single year, we set new records for greenhouse gas emissions. And we're in the midst of a global economic recession at best. It's clear at this point that civilization is a heat engine, and from a great paper by Timothy Garrett in Climatic Change, only complete collapse prevents runaway climate change. We've known this for years. And by collapse, what Garrett means is no fuel at the filling stations, no food at the grocery stores, and no water coming out of the municipal taps. If we wanted to have habitat for humans in the not too distant future, the understanding in 2009, when the paper was published, was that we needed to completely collapse industrial civilization. And I don't know anybody who signed up for that, by the way. And I can't imagine a politician running on that campaign. I can just see two presidential candidates in debate. No, I can collapse it faster than you can. No, I can have the lights out by a week after I'm elected. Right. According to a paper in Astrophysical Journal, yes, even the astrophysicists are talking about climate change. Earth is within 1% of inhabitability. That's not very far. So for the entire enterprise of astrophysicists, it was assumed that Earth was in the middle of the habitable zone. Here's the habitable zone for stars of different sizes. So for a star our size, the astrophysicists thought Earth was right there in the middle of the habitable zone for the entire discipline of astrophysics. But then somebody actually looked and discovered last March that actually Earth is on the inner edge of the habitable zone, within 1% of being uninhabitable. Mars is here. Venus is a similar distance from Earth as Earth is from Mars. Venus is about right there, and we know what happened to Venus's atmosphere. It gets stripped away. What this suggests is that with minor changes in Earth's atmosphere, we could go Venus. Well, guess what? We haven't made minor changes in Earth's atmosphere. We've made major changes in Earth's atmosphere. We've gone from 280 parts per million to 400 parts per million, nearly 400 parts per million carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. That's one of a handful of greenhouse gases. Another one is methane. Methane was at 700 parts per billion before the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. It's now at about 2,000. Nearly triple the level of methane as we observed at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. How big a deal is methane? Well, it's about 100 times more powerful a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide molecule for molecule. 100 times in the short term, meaning less than 20 years. It's only about 20 times more powerful than carbon dioxide over 100 years or so, but we don't have 100 years or so. And finally, a little bit about that collapse Tim Garrett wrote about. Clive Hamilton points out in his latest book that without the atmospheric sulfates associated with industry, when collapse occurs, Earth would be an extra 1 C warmer. Add 1.1 C to the current 0.85 C, and we're at 1.95 C. Let's call it 2. Even collapse takes us to 2 C, the much dreaded political target. If the system doesn't collapse, we're at 2 C within a matter of years from now. If the system does collapse, we're at 2 C within 3 days. And they call us Homo sapiens, the wise ape. Thinking it should have been Homo calidus, which is the clever ape, instead. There's this contrarian myth that's been floating around since 1998, the hottest year of global average temperature based on land records. And the myth is that the climate change has slowed, has plateaued, that based on land surface records, we've seen a pause in climate warming, in the Earth's warming, since 1998. And in fact, based on land records, that's right. And so people wondered for a long time, where's that heat going? As it turns out, it's going into the ocean. So you look at 1998, and that's where heating of the oceans accelerates. So we figured out about a year ago where that extra heat is going. It's not going onto land masses, it's going into the ocean. And finally, just less than a month ago, there's a paper that came out with an explanation of that. The general heating of the Earth's surface has increased the winds over the ocean, and that increased wind has allowed for more heat to be sunk deeper into the oceans than was previously occurring. If we have an El Nino event, a bunch of that heat comes out quite suddenly in a short period of time. If we don't have an El Nino event, if we have continue the series of La Nina years, then that heat stays in the ocean and warms up and therefore acidifies the ocean. Already the oceans have acidified to the extent that more than half of the phytoplankton in the ocean has been killed within the last few decades. Phytoplankton is the base of the marine food web and accounts for about half the food we eat. So if we keep this up, we're going to kill all the phytoplankton.
Doesn't it also account for about 2/3 of the oxygen in the atmosphere?
It accounts almost 1 for 1 with land plants. So it accounts for about half of the oxygen. And yes, it would be inconvenient to not have oxygen in the atmosphere, if that's where you're going with that leading question. However, oxygen is incredibly recalcitrant in the atmosphere, so I suspect it'll be 1,000 years or more before we have oxygen levels drop down to 16 or 15% in the atmosphere, as opposed to the current 18%. So there'll be a huge lag after the phytoplankton die before oxygen drops to unsafe levels. I don't know. 21? 21, and 15 apparently becomes dangerous for humans. So we're a long way from oxygen being dangerous.
Your exhalation is 11% by asphyxiation if you breathe that. Only that, so.
Nice. Thanks.
Is you giving advice? I'm not even done yet. She's making a movie, it's called The End.
So is the heat in the oceans, is that why Antarctica?
The heat in the ocean helps explain why Antarctica and the Arctic are both losing ice, yes. And in particular in Antarctica, it hasn't been observed until quite recently that the ice is melting, and it's melting from below. So the surface ice has remained approximately the same, but the ice is melting from below, so we're losing ice mass. It's much more obvious what's going on in the Arctic. Cover is being reduced as well as mass. I want to talk a little bit about the 28 self-reinforcing feedback loops that are irreversible at temporal spans relevant to the human condition. 28. And then there are 2 that are reversible if we have the political will. And I'm going to focus primarily on methane clathrates coming out of the Arctic Ocean, because that one happened 4 years ago. It was reported in Science 4 years ago, so this is the one we know the most about. And we know quite a bit about it at this point. And then I'm just going to list the others, because at some point, there's no point. At some point you realize that we fired the Gatling gun and the bullets are all coming, and it only takes one to put us out, so why study the other 9,000 bullets we fired? So the Arctic, the methane hydrates are clathrates in the shallow sea floor of the Arctic Ocean, which are bubbling up to the surface and releasing the methane into the atmosphere from these clathrates, these little cage structures that methane in the Arctic seafloor alone is equivalent to 1,000 to 10,000 gigatons of carbon versus 226 gigatons that were burned with fossil fuels as of March 2010. So now we're up over 260 gigatons of fossil fuels that we burn, of carbon we burn through fossil fuels. But in any event, the methane hydrates in the Arctic are 4 to 40 times roughly the carbon equivalent of all the carbon dioxide we burned so far since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. So it's a lot. We now know that a minor increase in temperature is sufficient to trigger a methane release. And that's because the clathrates are in the shallow seabed. They're not at great depth. 50 gigaton burp of methane is highly possible at any time. This is equivalent to more than 1,000 gigatons of carbon, or roughly 4 times what we've burned so far. Highly possible at any time. Methane plumes have been observed up to 150 kilometers across by NASA's CARVE project. What a methane plume, what that looks like is if you're in a ship out there in the Arctic Ocean and you happen to be in the middle of a methane plume, 150 kilometers across, it would be like ginger ale bubbling out of the Arctic Ocean as far as you could see in every direction. You wouldn't see it for very long because you'd be dead shortly thereafter because the methane is lethal. So take the picture for posterity. Based on an analysis from this one feedback alone, we can expect global average temperature of more than 4 C above baseline by 2030, more than 10 C by 2040. And this is what that looks like. Sam Carana fits a polynomial curve to the existing data. It's number 3 here, and has methane going exponential out of the Arctic Ocean. Malcolm Light's analysis concludes that the Gulf Stream transport rate, or the thermohaline conveyor belt, which drags warm Atlantic water up into the Arctic, started the methane hydrator clathrate gun firing in the Arctic in 2007, when the energy per year exceeded 10 million times the energy necessary to release those clathrates. More than 10 million times. So this apparently has been going on since 2007. I think that's long enough time to conclude that the clathrate gun has been fired. The clathrate gun is what climate scientists, including James Hansen, have been worried about for a long time. In Storms of My Grandchildren, Hansen worried quite a bit about firing the clathrate gun, or the methane bomb. And it looks like we're there. You only know about a self-reinforcing feedback loop being triggered by looking in the rearview mirror. We have about 7 years worth of rearview mirror at this point. This illustrates what Albert Bartlett, the professor emeritus from Colorado University for many years, described in his presentation, which he gave over 1,000 times. He says the greatest shortcoming of the human race is our inability to understand the exponential function. We think linearly, so we think this change so far has been pretty linear. But events have gone beyond linear now. We're no longer in the linear age in terms of change in the recent past, much less in the near future. An example commonly used in high school classes is you have a pond and algae, a little tiny bit of algae, and the algae doubles in cover every day. How long after the lake is half full before it's full? 1 day. That's an example of what happens with an exponential function. What this looks like as of about 3 weeks ago in terms of methane concentration, you can see heavy concentration of methane in the Arctic and over the land masses of large continents. Siberia, where the methane is being released as the permafrost melts, northern Canada, and all through the Arctic. So the measurements have been up to about 2,400 parts per billion within the last few days. This is one of the two reasons that habitat for humans will disappear from the northern hemisphere before it disappears from the southern hemisphere. The other reason is that the land-to-water ratio is so much higher in the northern hemisphere than it is in the southern hemisphere. And land masses heat up more than twice as fast as the global average. So a 2°C rise in global average temperature means roughly 4.5 or 5°C rise in the interior of continents. In the southwestern interior of a large continent in the northern hemisphere, like say right there where I live, you can expect habitat to disappear for humans within weeks after collapse is complete, or within weeks of hitting the 2°C global average. So all this water relative to land in the southern hemisphere provides for a great ameliorating impact in terms of temperature rise. Not to mention the fact that there's a large continent down there that still has quite a bit of ice. In contrast to the Arctic, where the US Navy even predicts that the Arctic ice will be gone by September 2016. That's the US Navy. The headline says, Arctic ice to disappear by 2016, 84 years ahead of schedule.
84 years.
I'm thinking, who wrote the schedule? It's ahead of, who wrote the schedule? Did we put that on a calendar somewhere? Journalists. So, that's huge, by the way. What happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic. It ain't Vegas. We lose the ice in the Arctic and things get really weird in a hurry. The Arctic is the planet's ice air conditioner. Arctic ice is the planet's air conditioner. One example to illustrate the point. To melt 1 gram of ice into 1 gram of water at 0 degrees. So they're both at 0 degrees. They're both at freezing. To melt 1 gram of ice to 1 gram of water requires 80 calories. Take that same 80 calories, put it into the gram of water that is now melted at 0 degrees. Put in the 80 calories, it goes up to 80 degrees centigrade. When we get rid of the ice, that heat starts going into the ocean. It starts warming up the ocean instead of melting ice. When the Arctic ice is gone, an event we haven't observed in human history, it's going to produce profound changes in temperature, global average temperature. So there was one self-reinforcing feedback loop presented in the Reference Journal Literature in 2010, and there were 4 more discovered and reported in 2011. One of those being Siberian methane. Methane was leaking out of Siberia as well, out of land masses. It's not just out of the Arctic, it's out of land masses as well. And in summer 2010, those methane vents were about 30 centimeters or about a foot in diameter. And so scientists would go out and light those on fire and make this nice Roman candle. So just go whoosh, you know, look mom, I can light a fire. This is what scientists do to get attention. This summer 2010, those methane vents are about 30 centimeters across. Summer 2011, they're a kilometer across. We're seeing geological events play out in real time. We're beyond linear in terms of climate change. So 1 self-reinforcing feedback loop in 2010, 4 in 2011, these 6 in 2012. So we're seeing an acceleration of the reporting of these self-reinforcing feedback loops. And finally, in 2013, there were these 6. That gets us through July. And then there were these 6. That gets us through September. And then there were these 4. So there were 16. 16 reported in 2013. So far, only 1 reported in 2014, but we're running out of places to categorize these things. We're learning a lot more about each of these self-reinforcing feedback loops, and the evidence becomes increasingly dire and overwhelming. Finally, there are 2 reversible feedback loops. We could not drill in the Arctic, and in fact, we aren't anymore. Isn't that awesome? Shell went up there in 2012, September, when they were fast-tracked. They sent the 2 rigs in the world deemed capable of handling the weather in the Arctic, and they were crushed. Sometimes nature bats last. And they went scurrying back and spent the next year and a half working on them, and they just announced 2 weeks ago that they're not going back. That the seas are too high, that we don't have the technology to extract that energy, and the energy doesn't have enough energy in it. The energy return on investment is so low that it's just not worth it so far. We'll see if that holds. And finally, if there's a way to save a buck, we're going to take the shortcut, right? One of my neighbors in southwestern New Mexico gave a presentation at the public library about 2.5 weeks ago. And he was on the first ever tanker to go through the vaunted Northwest Passage, 1969. He was on an oil freighter, of course, that busted its way through the Northwest Passage. And he described the experience in riveting detail. And it was a difficult task. And to get other boats to break out that boat when it got stuck, and it was really tough going. And now it's like you can go up there in your sailboat. Anybody in September can go through the Northwest Passage. Now it's open water. It was 1969. It's not that long ago. So now what? I'd like to check in with the penguins. Quick, before we kill them all. There are two responses to this kind of information. There's the societal response. What do we do as a society? And there's the individual response. And the societal response remains the same as it's always been. If the message is somehow we're going to ignore jobs and growth simply to address climate change, I want to go for that. And of course not. This is again in that category of promoting collapse. And no politician is going to get up on the stage and say, collapse is going to save our species, therefore we're going to collapse the settlement arrangements. The Obama administration surely knew about this briefing from the Alliance of Small Island States at COP15, the Copenhagen climate change meetings that they threw under the bus. And this line comes from that report. The long-term sea level that corresponds to current CO2 concentrations is about 23 meters above today's levels. This is when it was 385 parts per million carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We're now at 396. And the temperatures will be 6 degrees C or more higher. These estimates are based on real long-term climate records, not on models. So there's a lag between carbon dioxide emissions and temperature, or in the past, between temperature and carbon dioxide emissions. But when the catching up is done to 385 parts per million carbon dioxide, it's going to produce conditions which are unsuitable for humans to survive. So then, in terms of individual response, I'd like to turn to the moral philosopher Bruce Springsteen for my advice. In the end, what you don't surrender, well, the world just strips away. Or let's say it like a Zen Buddhist, let go or be dragged. The near future will not be like the recent past. Or carpe diem, seize the day. When I speak on college campuses, students point out after my presentation that I'm pronouncing this incorrectly. It's actually crappy diem, as in you ruined my day. Or from Nietzsche, live as though the day were here, to which I would add only one thing. That's from a philosopher that predated Nietzsche by a couple thousand years. Hippocrates from the Hippocratic Oath. First, do no harm. And finally, from poet Leon Staff in the Warsaw Ghetto, even more than bread, we now need poetry in a time when it seems that it is not needed at all. We've had science and technology for quite a long time, and the technology produced by the knowledge that comes from science has been catastrophic. Let's take the Wendell-Berry route and do some poetry now. I always finish like a Hollywood movie. I have really good news. You get to die. Isn't that awesome? It is. It means you got to live. And the odds against you living, the odds against this collection of DNA being present, exceed the odds against plucking at random a single atom from the entire universe. We know a lot about DNA. We know roughly how many atoms there are in the universe, between 10 to the 80th and 10 to the 100th atoms in the universe. The odds against you being here, you being in this physical form, your DNA appearing in this collection, in this human body, anytime, ever, exceed by far the odds against plucking a single atom from the entire universe. If I believed in miracles, I'd think we all were one. It's incredible. We get to die. And that means we get to live. As evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins says, in the teeth of these stupefying odds, it is you and I that are privileged to be here, privileged with eyes to see where we are and brains to wonder why. Nobody else gets to do this. And I'll add something else. We're here at the end. Everybody else you've ever known checked out before the movie was over.
Oh, shit.
They walked out there, and we get to be here at the end. If that isn't awesome, I don't know what is. And this is amazing because we're the last human beings to get to display our humanity, to get to demonstrate the best of what it means to be human. We get to act as if we're in hospice because we are, because the whole planet is at this point, including the species that remain after we drive 200 species to extinction every day. The whole planet's in hospice. When I see people in hospice, I don't see people grubbing for another dollar. I see people giving things away. I don't see people hoarding. I see people giving of themselves. I see people acting with kindness and compassion and going out with some semblance of dignity. Let's try that. Even if all the data are wrong, even if I'm wrong, wouldn't that be something? Wouldn't that be a pretty reasonable way to live? I think so. But I've been called some funny names. Things that we might pursue in hospice, and here's the typical CEO response. And so while the end of the world scenario will be rife with unimaginable horrors, we believe that the pre-end period will be filled with unprecedented opportunities for profit. So this is the Goldman Sachs approach. I mean, this is Lloyd Blankfein and Jamie Dimon and the people who apparently just love money so much that they must have more. This is the 85 people on the planet who have as much net financial worth as half of the people on the planet. But I don't think this is anybody in this room, or you wouldn't be in this room. There's money to be made out there. There's still money to be made in planetary destruction. Get out there and get after it. No, I don't think this is us. I think we're the people who actually might be interested in pursuing something different than that, something other than fiat currency, like we might pursue love and lives of excellence. And by lives of excellence, I'm thinking here of Socrates and his approach. He spent an entire life asking 6 questions. 6 questions. That's all. He just went around and asked people questions. 6 questions in various forms. What is courage? What is good? What is justice? What is moderation? What is piety? What is virtue? 6 questions. After 70 years, they killed him for it. We should be so lucky to rabble-rouse so much that we just by asking questions, the state can't tolerate us anymore. What a way to go. Nobody gets out alive. So that's a life of excellence. And pursuing love, pursuing those we love. And I'm thinking about your children, your grandchildren, the people you're spending time with. And I'm also thinking about the living planet that sustains us all. It's a living planet that allows us to live, not the other way around. I used to say before the Great Recession really kicked in, that if you think the economy is more important than the environment, try holding your breath while counting your money. But then I'd speak in Michigan and people would pull out their wallet while they were holding their breath and they'd put it back in and they'd say, "What else you got?" Didn't take but a couple of minutes. Because they're in Michigan, they're on the front line of collapse. I think we can do better than what we've been doing. Occasionally people despair upon hearing me speak. Astonishing, I know. Or from The Princess Bride, inconceivable. To which I respond, action is the antidote to despair. Even if, especially if, our actions don't matter in the long run, what better judge of our character than our willingness and ability to act? I once read that the best judge of a man's character, obviously this line was written by a man, the best judge of a man's character is what he can do for those who do nothing for him. What he does for those who can do nothing for him. So think about that. Think about people who can do nothing for you. You have power over them, and yet you treat them with kindness and dignity and compassion. And we can do that about everything. It's not just about our character. It's about everything we do. It's about our humanity. Action is the antidote to despair, as iconoclastic Tucsonan writer Edward Abbey pointed out years and years ago. So, if you're damned if you do, and damned if you don't, then do. What have you got to lose? What have we got to lose? Let's do something. Even if ultimately it won't make any difference. We are judged only by ourselves. There's no history left to judge us anymore. If you want to learn more about my writing, and how could you not? I write profusely at naturebats.guyMcPherson.com. And I write a monthly essay for Transition Voice since the e-zine was founded about 4 years ago. And my latest effort is with a couple of other teachers and homesteaders in preparing people for an ambiguous future. So, finally, my latest book is called Going Dark, and I have copies here. I promote and practice a gift economy, which means you can just take one if you want. There are also bookmarks. Laminated bookmarks. And the bookmarks have, most importantly, this URL on them. So there's an essay in Going Dark that starts on page 85 that describes the dire nature of the climate situation. I've only given just a brief overview here. And all this information can be found with links at GuyMcPherson.com/climate-chaos. That URL is on these bookmarks. So by all means, take a bookmark, take a book. If you want to give me a gift back, you can give me fiat currency, but I'm not asking for that. If you want, give me a gift. Sometimes when I speak on college campuses, nobody has any money, of course, especially college students. They owe their entire life savings forever to the federal government, just for the privilege of going to school. So frequently they give me pieces of art. Last time I spoke on a college campus, it was in Winnipeg, and I complained that I would sign books, but I don't have a pen. And so the first guy says, "Here, you can have my pen. I'll take a book." So that was great. It was thoughtful. Some people are clever. I would be ecstatic to entertain your questions or comments, and at this point, of course, answers are particularly welcome. So thank you very much for your rapt attention, and please, let's have a discussion. Thank you. Can we turn the lights up? All the way in the back there?
Do you see any possibilities for a mass-scale investment in carbon sequestration, soils, trees, plants, in a time scale that could make a difference? I heard a trillion tree program bandied about recently.
Right.
And
so
soils, I mean, those sequester in a time frame that may yet be relevant?
no.
Okay.
And a primary reason for that is it's going to require an enormous amount of fossil fuel energy to plant a trillion trees and to transport the water to the desert where that project proposes planting those trees. So, and in addition, the time is so short. You know, we're talking a decade and a half to implement change. Trees just are not going to grow that fast and sequester that much carbon. In addition, they're carbon neutral. plant the trees, they grow, they sequester carbon, and then what happens to them? Oh, that's right, they die. And almost all that carbon is released back up into the atmosphere. They fix some in the soils, admittedly. It depends on the ecosystem, how much they fix in the soils. But I don't see that. And I read about that at this essay with a few links. There's a question right up here. Maybe not. Go ahead.
Yeah, did you say that link will, or that, yeah, the hyperlink will have information from your presentation, or?
Yes.
Like,
All the information I presented here is included here, and there's links to everything I've said.
Okay.
So this is the single best source of what's going on in the real world of climate change.
Okay. Yeah, I had a second question real quick. Earlier you were talking about positive feedback loops, and I was just wondering if the ones that you listed, that you said there was 2 that we could change reversible, and then there was 16, was it? That,
28.
oh, 28? Okay, yeah.
28.
The ones you listed, they were I mean, what about like the plankton that dies and then the carbon that's released from that, and that's like a sink, and then like I mean, I don't know, I didn't see your whole.
I love it when I'm the most optimistic person in the room.
Yeah. Yeah. And then there's
Yeah, these are the ones that are reported in sort of the mainstream scientific arena. And there may well be others that people haven't thought of or that we haven't documented yet. Like the fact that all those phytoplankton are going to die and are going to be unable to fix the carbon they're fixing now.
right.
Yeah, you're a happy-go-lucky guy, I can tell.
I love
You're a lot of fun at a party, aren't you?
I read climate scientists who don't mince words, James Hansen, Kevin Anderson, but none of them, so far that I have known, predict that human beings are going to be extinct in 50 years, as you do in your book, Kind of.
Yes, that's right.
Why? What facts do you have that we're not hearing from other scientists?
Almost nobody is willing to admit that the Clathrate gun has been fired. That includes Hansen. Although Hansen made a major shift within the last month. Up until a month ago, he said that 2C is a relevant target. And less than a month ago, he said 1C, we cannot possibly go beyond 1C. As we've known since the United Nations Greenhouse Gas Task Force reported in October 1990 that we can't go over 1, or it's going to be utter catastrophe. Well, it turns out we have utter catastrophe with these self-reinforcing feedback loops at 0.85, earlier than expected. Kevin Anderson is the guy in the UK that doesn't fly, and he is the person who comes the closest to anybody I know who still has a job, who speaks truth to power. So I have great respect for him and great respect for James Hansen, although James Hansen is still on the nuclear fix, unaware that recent scientific literature indicates that nuclear power plants are not carbon neutral. They actually produce fossil fuel carbon to build them and get them going. Over their lifespan, they are carbon intensive. So I think Hansen is behind the times. Yes, he's been outspoken for a long time, but I don't think he has kept up with the relevant literature.
What are your thoughts about Fukushima?
What are my thoughts about Fukushima? I think it was probably a bad idea. I wasn't done with my sentence. Who's that actor? That guy. Who's that actor? And when he gets a script, he throws out all the punctuation. Maybe him too, but it's not. Christopher Walken. Christopher Walken throws out the punctuation, and that's why he has these unusual gaps in the way he speaks. Doesn't make a lot of sense sometimes. He's a funny guy. But I digress. I wasn't finished with this. I think it's a bad idea to implement a program so that we can boil water without having the slightest clue what to do with the waste products. Waste products that last millions of years, in the case of plutonium. And we don't even have, there's never been a human structure to last longer than 50,000 years. We're so filled with hubris We think, oh, we'll fix that, we'll solve that later. So in 1939, when the nuclear age began, we just assumed somebody will fix that down the road. Guess what? Nobody fixed it. There was a paper presented at American Geophysical Union meetings. Robin, what was the guy's name?
Brad Werner.
Brad Werner. Brad Werner. If he was in Germany, he'd be Werner, but he's Brad Werner. And the title of his talk was, "Is Earth Fucked?" And I think, yeah. I mean, he didn't answer it. But it's pretty clear that because of cluster of Fukushima and similar such events. I mean, just consider Fukushima, which according to Helen Caldicott and Arnie Gunderson and David Suzuki and other nuclear folks, Fukushima alone represents a significant threat to human habitat in the northern hemisphere. Now there's 440 some nuclear power plants around the world. And so if we collapse the set of living arrangements, if we stop, if we get that president who stands up and says, I'm gonna have lights out by the day after tomorrow, and we actually pull that off, then we could have stopped runaway greenhouse, and we've done that like 40 years ago. But then all the nuclear power plants in the world melt down. So that's gonna be inconvenient.
Why do they melt down?
Because they rely upon grid-tied electricity to maintain the circulation of the water through the cooling ponds. Until those spent fuel rods spend years in the cooling ponds and then are stored into dry cask storage, they're dangerous. So they're dangerous for a long time. There was a panel in New York City late last year, including Ralph Nader and the most recent ex-head of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission in the United States. And they were asked at the very end of the panel how long it would take to decommission Indian Point, the nuclear power plant right outside New York City. And they hemmed and hawed and refused to answer. And finally, they were badgered long enough that they had to come up with an answer. They said 6 decades to shut down Indian Point. 6 decades. It's a long time. Forever is a long time, especially toward the end.
This is a difficult question. I've written a novel about global warming, so I ascribe to a lot of what you're saying. But I also struggle with this idea. We have a mythology that human beings are this sort of alien presence and we're doing this terrible thing to nature. But in point of fact, we are nature. There's nothing outside of nature, and we are exactly what nature is doing. And you fly over Phoenix or look at what's going on in China, it seems like it's nature doing this. And from your philosophical side, because often we want to demonize people for going to Disneyland or driving an SUV, but you know what? Usually it's, in many cases, their best human emotion. They want their family safe, so out of love they think it's going to keep safe. Of course, it won't. Or they're going to Disneyland because they're doing it for their kids. So you're working against something so fundamental in the human experience that is also probably the best part that people experience in themselves. And then to tell them, not only you're wrong, not only are you destroying everything, but you're an abomination to all of nature. It's a very difficult thing philosophically. So I'd love to know your philosopher's side. If we are nature, and we didn't come from another planet, we're doing what nature wants done here.
Anybody familiar with Louis C.K., comedian?
Oh, yeah.
Social critic, Louis C.K. I love this. He's the one on Indians. This little 1-minute clip on Indians, he's awesome. He says, sometimes I think white people came from like another planet. That's how he starts. So maybe we're just that alien. But no, we are in fact part of nature. We act as if we're apart from nature instead of a part of nature. But we're definitely a part of nature. And we're the mutant part. 2 million years human beings lived on the planet without going into human population ownership. 2 million years humans lived on the planet at the global level without going into human population ownership. 2 million years we lived in systems, in social systems that did not allow for degradation of human habitat. And then a few thousand years ago we discovered civilization. And civilizations rose several times, more or less, several places, more or less, simultaneously. And from then, it's all been a wild ride. We were immediately in human population overshoot. We started destroying the water and fouling the air and washing the soil into the ocean and all that stuff we've been doing since then. Furthermore, ratcheting up human population overshoot at the rate of 207,000 or so people a day. That's births minus deaths. So if you're looking for fault, for blame, it's not you and me. It's this set of living arrangements into which we've been born. We were born into captivity. We were born into civilization. We didn't get to choose. Nobody comes out and says, oh shit, no, I'm going back in. Right, and not only that, but it just keeps getting better, right? We got iPods now. And the whole thing. And it just looks like it keeps getting better. Every year of my life has been worse than the year before. Every year we dirty more air and foul more water and that whole thing. And everybody I know thinks it's getting better because we have smartphones. Right? So that's my bumper sticker, genocide for smartphones. We know how we chose, didn't we? More about blame. Of course it's not our fault. We were born into the set of living arrangements. We just did what society expected of us, and if we didn't, we're called crazy. And furthermore, it's 40 years from cause to effect. It's 40 years from greenhouse gas emissions until temperature rise. 40 years. 40 years ago, I was 13. I wasn't even driving. I was looking forward to it. Having no clue in my early teens what the consequences would be. None of us knew. If you knew 40 years ago that we were headed for the abyss, and you lived this long, you're a stronger person than me. To have that clattering around in your head.
Thank you.
Did she just hit me for calling her crazy? Because I almost never get that. Okay, you're all crazy. So it's 40 years from cause to effect, from action to consequence in terms of warming of the planet. And within the last 29 years, we've generated more greenhouse gas emissions than in the previous 236 years combined. So we haven't even begun to see the temperature rise associated with those last 29 years. 0.85 is a walk in the park compared to what's coming. 0.85 sea temperature rise. So, but I'm not looking to blame anybody except the whole thing. You know, the whole system is irredeemably corrupt, and we just showed up. Like, we didn't get to choose it. We could have chose sometime and we wouldn't get to see the end of the movie. And for most people, they'd think that was better.
What do you think of some of these ideas about shooting a bunch of particles up in the atmosphere?
So geoengineering is a fine question. Let's see, with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change in their latest assessment, which is due out later this year, but which has been heavily leaked, they said global warming is irreversible without massive geoengineering of the Earth's chemistry. That's a direct quote. Since then, we've had a paper come out in Earth System Dynamics that says climate geoengineering cannot simply be used to undo global warming. Next paper, geoengineering may succeed in cooling the Earth, but it would also disrupt precipitation patterns around the world, so we couldn't actually grow any food. Next paper, attempts to reverse the impacts of global warming by injecting reflective particles into the stratosphere could make matters worse. Next paper, environmental research letters, risk of abrupt and dangerous warming is inherent to large-scale implementation of solar radiation management, putting particles up into the air. Next paper, from a couple of days ago, current schemes, and this paper looked at the five most common current schemes of geoengineering. Current schemes are likely to either be relatively useless or to actually make things worse.
Yeah.
Finally, let's ask the people what they think. They think it's a stupid idea. I agree with them. For a change, I agree with people in this completely irredeemably corrupt society. I think they figured this one out. In the back there.
Nothing, that there's nothing that can be done, and it doesn't make any difference what is tried. Nothing can change the fact that everyone in this room is going to die from climate change. Do you feel that presenting things in that form actually encourage people to try to do something about it?
No,
No. It doesn't.
for several reasons. First of all, I don't know anybody, well, there's a handful of people around the world, deep green resistance members among them, who are trying to terminate the settled living arrangements. And I've been trying to do that for a long time, and it really hasn't worked out very well. Two, people say, well, in light of this information, don't you think people will become hedonists? Americans? Become hedonists? How would I tell the difference? We do everything we want. We have the world's reserve currency. I don't know a single college student who doesn't show up at college having made the requisite trip to Europe. That was a big deal when I was a kid, and you gotta love stories that start like, when I was a kid. When I was a kid, people didn't just go to Europe when they were in high school. It was inconceivable that anybody would do such a thing. Am I afraid people will start acting like hedonists? Not really. I'm encouraging, the Buddha, I bet this story isn't true, but I'm going to tell it as if it is. The Buddha apparently asked one of his students how frequently he thought about death, and the student goes, I think about death really pretty much all the time, probably 100 times a day. And the Buddha goes, you must think about death with every breath. Let's live. Let's live here now. You all knew you were going to die, right? Since you were 11 or so? And you reach this understanding. When you're 5 or so, apparently you realize that you're going to die, but you don't really have a chance to synthesize it, to integrate it into your being. But by the time you're 10 or 12 years old, everybody knows that death doesn't just apply to grandma, it applies to them too. And I remember actually when my grandmother died when I was 11 years old, and I cried for 2 weeks, and I barely knew the woman. I mean, I'd met her a few times. She lived a long ways away, and I didn't know her at all. And I cried for a long time. And later, much later, it occurred to me that I wasn't crying for her. I was crying for me. She was an indicator that I'm mortal too. And I hate that. I mean, I don't mind that nobody gets out alive as long as I'm an exception. So, the wolf is always at the door, right? Let's act with some urgency in our lives. Let's act as if the here and now matters. Let's act as if the people around us matter. Let's act as if the living planet matters too. That's all I'm suggesting. I'm suggesting that we act. I'm also suggesting that I can't imagine it will work to save our species. But as a conservation biologist, I've long known that humans were going to go extinct. I didn't know it would be on my watch. But all species go extinct, including the most clever of them all. Yeah. You with the hat.
He says,
Or
is
not.
it true that you're investing heavily in startup space travel companies? Or are you relying upon intervention by friendly extraterrestrials?
No, I'm not investing in space travel. I suggest that we live here now. That's sort of inconsistent with jumping in a spaceship. And I read The Martian Chronicles when I was a kid. I don't know if you remember Ray Bradbury's classic, The Martian Chronicles. And people were starting to kill each other in mass here on Earth, so a bunch of people decided we'll go to Mars. And it wasn't long that they were on Mars before they could look back and see everybody on Earth killing themselves. And by that time, the process was well underway on Mars. So we not only have to escape, but we have to change human behavior. With respect to aliens, all you have to do is pretend that I'm an alien. Now convince me. Tell me why you're worth saving. Tell me why you're worth extending the run of the species that is driving to extinction 200 species a day. Tell me why you're worth saving when you're not saving anything. And when you can do that, you can have the microphone.
I have two questions. The quick one that is, I kind of missed what you meant by class rate gun. That's not my main question. That just came up in your answers to other people's questions. People that I know who question climate science, one of the big arguments that they make is, okay, with carbon, you're talking parts per million. With methane, you're talking parts per billion. And they say that really the biggest greenhouse gas from their opinion, the thing that can hold the most heat, is water in the atmosphere, which is, I'm not sure exactly, but it's...
That's correct, by the way. The biggest greenhouse gas is water in the atmosphere.
So, and
So, right, so it's a little change and a little number. What could possibly go wrong?
Right.
Yeah, I've heard that one. When you ingest anthrax, it's a little number that has a big change. 280 parts per million is not 400 parts per million. If you question the greenhouse effect, go out to your car on a sunny day with the windows down. And it's almost the same temperature inside as out. And then roll up the windows. Like in 5 minutes, it's a little uncomfortable. And in 15, it's a lot uncomfortable. In 30 minutes.
Percentage of the car is the window.
Right. And so this is an excellent analogy for Earth with a whole bunch of windows. And every molecule of carbon dioxide above baseline is rolling up a little window. And it takes 40 years for those effects to be felt. I'm not sure how to convince people who are unconvinced by evidence. I don't think there's any way to do that.
Well, I mean, it's clear to me that there's global warming going on, but the math between parts per billion and parts per million and water vapor, which I'm not sure exactly, but it's much different. So I have a hard time at making that math work, like making it, conceptualizing it, and go, oh yeah, that's what it is.
Well, I'm not sure I can help you then, because you can put greenhouse gas emissions or global warming or climate change in the search box of your favorite search engine and find abundant information that is merely elucidation of what has become the scientific obvious. In 1847, George Perkins Marsh, United States ambassador and naturalist. Isn't that interesting? What a weird combination. You don't see many ambassadors these days who aren't attorneys, much less who are naturalists. 1847, before we started burning any fossil fuels at scale, 1847, George Perkins Marsh predicted global warming as a result of burning fossil fuels. By 1896, Svante Arrhenius, who went on to win the Nobel Prize in Chemistry, predicted we would observe a 1 degree C temperature rise, global temperature, planetary average, by the year 2000, if we keep burning fossil fuels. The mechanism has been known for a really long time. It was demonstrated in practice by Guy Callendar in 1938 in a paper in the Royal Society. And in 1938, he demonstrated there was a significant rise in global average temperature. There's a 40-year lag. He documented that rise in about 1915, about 40 years after we started burning fossil fuels at scale. The evidence is overwhelming. If it can't convince somebody, then it can't convince somebody, and I'm not interested in trying to convince them. It's pointless. This is like the difference between trying to convince people who believe in climate change, but that it's not that bad.
So the burning of fossil fuels, of course, it creates heat. And so we've got lots of heat going on all over the place all the time. So couldn't the heat that we're continually introducing into the environment be a major factor?
No, it can't. Because we turn the heat off for extended periods of time in various places. We now remove for the urban heat island effect and for local phenomena when calculating global average temperature. We can talk about this later, but I don't want to spend any more time on it today. The mechanism has been described, it's been illustrated. We've known for a long time that you can't burn fossil fuels that accumulated over millions of years in the span of 150 to 200 years without consequences. We've known this for a long time. We're seeing those consequences. We shouldn't be surprised. All the way in the back.
Can we shift gears a little bit and talk about living gracefully? Can you say a few words about the gift economy? That's what is near and dear to me.
Sure, I live in a small valley in southwestern New Mexico where I practice and promote agrarian anarchy. Anarchy is not chaos. Anarchy is an absence of rulers. Chaos is an absence of rules. I practice agrarian anarchy in the spirit of Wendell Berry and Edward Abbey and Henry David Thoreau, and to a lesser extent with slaves involved, Thomas Jefferson. And I also practice and promote a gift economy. And that's what we did for the first 2 million years of the human experience. It was only after civilization arose that we started the notion of currency. Yes, fiat
There it
currency.
is.
I almost every time I go to the store, which isn't very often, they ring me up, the cashier rings me up, and then he or she says, "How would you like to pay for that?" And I bring out these pieces of green paper. I'm like, "Are you still taking these?" And they look at me like I'm crazy. I'm not rolling that out because I've been told a lot worse. But they're still taking those. And it's all a con game. It's an unbelievable scheme. I mean, Secretary of Treasury Jack Lew admitted that last October. He said, if people want money, instead of rolling over the bonds, the whole system comes down. He admitted it's a Ponzi scheme. Right there in public. And the American public's like, can you pass the chips? What's on tonight anyway? So, a gift economy, of course a gift economy works great when you're in a tribal situation. If you have Dunbar's number of people, 150 to 250 people, then everybody can keep track of everybody. And the consequence of shunning somebody is probably death for that person. Now we've become so globalized and interconnected and dependent upon fiat currency that all bets are off, so to speak. But I'm still trying to promote that, even though it doesn't do any good. It's like everything else. Why not? I propose doing everything differently than we're doing now.
It feels great.
Yes, over here.
Thank you. Thanks for coming over here. You kind of lost me on methane hydrates. I think that is enough to kind of do us in. But I was doing some research recently on what they're calling next generation biofuels, and one of them cellulosic ethanol, and the other one that you're probably familiar with is algae. And in finding it, there's a number of people and companies that are doing some pretty cool stuff, and I came upon one in Florida that has already clocked that they can do 10,000 gallons of biofuels per acre per year using salt water and CO2 coming out of power plants. 10,000 gallons. You get about 50 gallons from soybean oil. So this is a completely different thing. Would that, change your predictions if we can kind of keep something like that going? Again, they've already proven it. The company, and I encourage everyone to look it up, it's Algenol, A-L-G-E-N-O-L. They're out of Florida, and they're trying to expand right now.
These are not my predictions. First of all, these are other people's predictions. I'm just relaying the good news, providing some context. With respect to the methane, that's a second question about methane, so I should explain that a little bit better. Methane is enclosed within small cages, only slightly bigger than the methane molecule, the CH4. Enclosed within a cage, and that cage is in the shallow seabeds. And when it warms, that cage with the methane starts to rise, and when it warms a little bit more, the cage falls apart. And then the methane molecule is released directly into the atmosphere. So these cages are called clathrates or hydrates. And so it's called the clathrate gun, or the methane bomb, and it appears that we've tripped it. Until we can undo the irreversible until we can actually reverse the irreversible feedback loops. I don't think it matters. And furthermore, I'm not a fan of car culture. I think car culture is a huge part of our problem. And so continuing car culture I don't think is a good idea, even if it means we're powering our cars with buffalo shit. I'm still not a fan.
So, but, I mean, if we were just, in a perfect world, we were able to stop drilling for oil, stop going to Vulcan up in North Dakota, Canada, and start putting in these ponds and growing biofuels that way. I mean, 10,000 gallons per acre per year, you've got to admit, is pretty significant.
Yeah, I'd be interested in seeing the energy return on energy investment for that. Is this tight oil like shale and tar sands?
No, this is algae. This is growing.
Yeah, I understand, but algae to petrol is not one magic wand of a step.
Oh, what it is 9,000 of those gallons is ethanol, and the remaining 1,000 gallons is about a third jet fuel, a third gasoline, and a third diesel, and then the sludge is plastics.
Okay, I don't know enough to comment. I encourage anybody to go Algenol, look them up. I'm not a fan of car culture, of airplane culture, of maintaining industrial civilization that's making us sick, making us crazy, and killing us by any means. So if this is another way to prop up industrial civilization, I'm not a fan. It sort of sounds like that. Yes?
So, questions. How and when did you come to your realizations about this stuff? And if there is no hope, why aren't you down in southwest New Mexico loving the people that are in your community?
Wow. Two tough questions back to back. Can we escort this guy out? Security? We got security? I think it's time we wrap this sucker up. Sometimes I show up and we have technical problems. Like the first stop on this tour was in Eugene. I have a point. Was in Eugene, and I found out 1 minute before the presentation begins that I don't have a projector. So I just did stand-up. Tragedy. And so I appreciate you humoring me with your laughter. I reached this realization in 2002 when I was editing a book on climate change that we were headed for extinction probably in 2030 or so. And about a year later, I discovered the concept of global peak oil. And I realized, this is it. This is the Hail Mary pass. This is the one that's going to save us. It's going to terminate industrial civilization. And we'll stop spewing emissions. And that was a long time ago.
Fracking happened.
Yeah, fracking and tar sands and, everything we do to maintain this set of living arrangements is killing everything, including us. And so that was 2003 or 2004 that I thought it would be game over by now. I moved to southwestern New Mexico for a variety of reasons, one of which was that the university where I was working was just another example of a fundamentally, irredeemably corrupt system. So I didn't feel comfortable working there anymore. And I'm not there now because the project has failed. I built a platinum level doomstead, a homestead that has 2 solar wells and a hand pump. It has rainwater harvesting to the tune of 6,000 gallons off the roof of the straw bale house. Passive solar heated. No fossil fuels are required to run the place. It's amazing. 4 huge gardens, a large orchard, goats, chickens, ducks, turkeys, and a goose named Myrtle. The most important part of the whole thing. And then she left. She went to the neighbors. They have 6 big white ducks, and she's like, hey, this is my people. So she wandered off, and she spends all her time down there, and she comes up like once every 2 or 3 months, and she goes whack, 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 and honks at us, and just to check in and say, I don't live here anymore, screw you. That's when I knew. I gotta get the hell out of there because it ain't working. Even Myrtle wouldn't stay. So it's been a complete catastrophic failure. I would rather be here than there.
Why is it a failure?
You mean besides Myrtle?
I mean your
Yeah, besides Myrtle.
Yeah, I know. I can't remember stuff. So I have to look it up.
Oh.
Okay, so it says here in this book, it must be true because it's on paper. Let's see. I left the easy life of a tenured professor at a major university to develop and occupy the property I call the Mud Hut. And I did that for 5 primary reasons, all of which have failed. So all the goals have failed to be met. The first of those I left as an act of resistance against the dominant paradigm. Guess what? The dominant paradigm and those within it failed to notice. 2, I left as an example of alternative living, in my case promoting a gift economy within agrarian anarchy. My example has failed to inspire a significant number of others to live differently, to live outside the system. 3, I left as a way to provide more time. Eyes are getting worse every day. A way to provide more time for speaking and writing about important topics, actions which were discouraged at the university where I was working. My last department head was hired specifically to make my life miserable enough that I would leave. She's a dean at the University of Washington now. Congratulations. I have enjoyed limited success in this arena, although time freed up not battling administrative dragons has been largely consumed with rigorous physical work, like digging those damn trenches for the water delivery system. 4, places a refuge for the youngster, the son of the couple with whom my wife and I share this property, as well as his generation. Due to ongoing accelerating climate change, the youngster's future in this location probably will be notably short. And 5, it's a way to extend my own life and that of my wife. Due to ongoing accelerating climate change, our future in this location is likely to be quite short. So those are the 5 goals I had. The next paragraph starts with, perhaps most importantly, there is a widening chasm within the partnership formed on this shared property. Although leaving the life I loved as an academic to move to the location made sense at the time, long before the climate change news grew so dire and when collapse appeared imminent, I now view the major personal transition as infinitely regrettable. I've come to see it as the worst mistake of my life, although I'm not dead yet, so I could yet outdo myself. So it hasn't worked in part because of relations on the property, which have broken down in a somewhat horrifying manner. You know, living with people is hard.
Hard.
He outdid me. That was going to be essentially my question. When did you find out that we were essentially going to all be settled? What was your reaction to it?
Right, of course my reaction at the time was utter despair, and I didn't fit in particularly well with society before that. But when you start mourning events that haven't happened yet, you're an absolute nutcase. And so people are mourning the death of their 92-year-old grandmother who's been hanging on, suffering immeasurably from cancer for 3 years. And I'm like, let it go. That's one human being who had a full and rich life. Let her go. And I'm mourning the near-term demise of our entire species. People are going, what? You don't even know what you're talking about. That's a theoretical thing. It's so abstract. It reminds me of Star Trek. As some things do. I don't know if you remember the early days Star Trek. I got that. Yes, that's exactly who I was going to talk about. Mr. Live Long and Prosper. So, a ship was blown up. A Vulcan ship was blown up, and like 300 people died, and Spock sheds a tear. A tear. It's unbelievable. He shows no emotion ever. And all the humans are like, what? What up with that? He says, you people mourn the death of a single individual. I just lost 320 of my comrades, and you can't understand it. And I felt the same way, only it was 7 billion. And nobody got that either. It's just weird. Yeah, so the question is, if this climate chaos causes human extinction, will there be any animals that will be alive? Yes, I think there will be. And the faster we terminate industrial civilization, the more species, I believe, will remain. Even if terminating industrial civilization leads to 2C in a short period of time, then I still think that some organisms have a chance. And here's the thing. If we have Chinook salmon next year, we might have Chinook salmon in 20 years. But if we don't have Chinook salmon next year, we won't. So what I'm working for is those other species at this point. I think we're done. But I'm working for those other species, and so here's what I'm really working for. Edward O. Wilson, conservation biologist at Harvard University, predicts that only 10 million years after an extinction level event, there have been 5 so far, we're in the midst of the 6th great extinction, only 10 million years after an extinction level event, we have a vibrant green planet again. 10 million years.
Right.
The more seeds we can plant now, the more species we save now, the greater likelihood that in only 10 million years we'll have a vibrant planet again. Recently, like within the last 2 months, there was a new species, previously unknown to humanity, discovered in the sarcophagus of Chernobyl. I think it was a slime mold in the sarcophagus. Ionizing radiation at that level, we can't even kill everything. Try as my goal, as much as that's our goal, is to kill everything. It appears that we're not going to be successful at that. So my goal is to keep as many species around as we possibly can.
So do you take any comfort from quantum mechanics and dark energy and dark matter? This could be a very small sliver of what we think is real.
Sure, absolutely. I take comfort from damn near anything at this point. Dark matter matters.
I'm remembering 2 of the past extinctions were, what, 60 million and 200 and...
55 million and 251 million years
And
ago.
what percentage of the land and sea species or phyla or whatever classes and orders died? You know, it was like 95% in the...
In the Great Dying 251 million years ago, the number of taxa, number of species, but probably at a more general level, maybe genera, that we lost was more than 95%. And 55 million years ago, it was more than 90%. So it's a huge proportion.
So everything that's here now follows from those. The
Yes,
survivors.
that's right. Everything that's here now is because those species made it through the extinction bottleneck.
So your hope would be to expand that 5 or 10 or 15% survival rate.
Yes, if we have 0.0001% to get it through, that's better than 0.00000001%. Yes, absolutely. Let's act as if every species matters.
On the higher end of the estimates that you have, though, do you feel like there could be a runaway kind of climate chaos that could lead to a similar kind of planet to Venus or something that's just kind of beyond where it could bounce back from a mass extinction event?
Yes, it's possible. It's possible that we could go Venus. And Sam Carana's analysis, it suggests just that by 2096 we'll have 860 degrees centigrade for the surface temperature. So that's Venus. It's by the end of the century. So it could be, but I think that we should act as if that's not going to happen. That we should act as if our future matters. That we should act as if the future of other organisms matters as well. Instead of just saying, it's done. It's game over. Let's party like it's 1999.
And then I have another question too about, like, with what you were saying of the actual time scale. And now I know that there's this drought in California and that saying food prices is gonna go up and all these kind of things, like, I kind of intuitively felt like maybe we were seeing the beginning of, like, maybe they're not gonna go down again, kind of, like, this is, you know, the food prices or the accessibility of that food, you know? And so I'm wondering if you think that that could be, like, what we're seeing now with the, these kind of, like, little, you know, effects on the food system. Do you think that that's going to be the first to get affected as far as what we'll really notice and see? Because the food producing areas, you know, are not going to be able to produce food like they were.
Right, could very well be. And David Korowicz, writing for Fiesta Group in late 2012, as I recall, indicates that global economic collapse will be complete in as little as 3 weeks after a significant disruption in the supply chain. And here he's talking about the supply chain disruption, including food or oil or any number of other things. With a significant disruption, we're 3 weeks away from terminating the set of living arrangements. So yes, I think that what we're seeing now is a result of climate change that is already baked into the cake. And that because of that 40-year lag, there's little we can do now that will have any impact on how those changes play out. We're locked into a drought where I live for a really long period of time. It's going to be wet and cold in the UK and Northern Europe for a long time. And so, yes, that threatens food supply.
What do you think the social impact will be over the next 2-3 years, like on a global scale?
Social impacts of climate change? Several people in retrospect now have viewed the Syrian spring as a consequence of drought, of food shortages induced by climate change. So if that's a canary in the coal mine, and it might be, then we could see that spreading to far wider portions of the globe. So I read an analysis yesterday indicating that we're 1 year away from massive global scale food riots because of disruptions in the food supply. Could be. Yeah. I can't hear you.
Are there counterbalancing cooling effects that have to do with climate change?
Okay, so are there counterbalancing cooling cycles? Well, there's at least one negative feedback I know about, one negative reinforcing loop. As the planet warms, it releases more heat into space. But as near as I can tell, that's linear, not exponential. We are due for an ice age, and the sun is dimming, and apparently will reach its lowest point in terms of radiation in about 2020. And so we're dimming right now. We're overcoming the effects of decreased energy coming from the sun, of what is scheduled to be an ice age. We're overcoming that with carbon emissions. So volcanoes, anybody? I mean, they work for the short term, but we need to keep spewing the materials into the air, the reflective particles into the air forever. And so, supervolcanoes? Anybody signing up for Yellowstone going? So it may well take something like that to counterbalance.
Preface this with, I am not a psychologist. I remember reading some...
And I'm not crazy, so we can have
I remember reading some like pop psychology reviews about educators telling people about climate change, and if they put it in a no way out of it kind of perspective, the students leave feeling as if they can't do anything about it, and when they track like how they change their behaviors afterwards, they don't change anything, or they recycle less. Are you, and if they hear about it in a positive light, like, we can do something. They tend to do more green-ish kind of stuff. Are you familiar with the study? If so, how do you, like, are there other things that go into the equation for you? Like, it's going to go anyways, at least we can go with dignity, something like that.
I'm not familiar with the study, but that never ceased me from commenting about the study, just because I don't know anything. The comment about recycling, if I punch you in the face, do you think that's okay if I apologize? No, of course not. That's a horrible thing. But we recycle. It's the same thing. Punch the planet in the face and we recycle. Oh, it's good. Look, I recycle. Look at me. Look at me. What about reduce and reuse? Remember the other two R's, the ones that matter? The only ones that make corporate America any money is the recycle one. So that's why we do that. But it's an apology after a punch in the face. I do this for many reasons. Among them that nobody else does. I think we have the right to know. And the corporate media and the corporate governments of the world are not telling you the facts. I think you have the right to know. I think you have the right to know what I know. And there's a whole bunch of people, by the way, who know what I know. I was contacted out of the blue, much to my surprise, by a guy you would all know if I said his name. He contacted me in December of 2012, and he says, you got it figured out on the climate change front. I'm buying the whole thing. And can I come visit the Mud Hut? Because I'm moving to the southern hemisphere and I want to replicate what you're doing. This guy's about my age, and I did a bunch of research to figure out if this was actually him. Because I'm thinking, famous people don't send me email messages. And so I did a bunch of research and it all matched. But still I wrote back to him and I said, are you really you? You know, because after he lied the first time, he wouldn't lie the second time, I'm sure of it now. So people know. People with lots of fiat currency are converting that fiat currency into land and homesteads in the southern hemisphere.
George
And
Bush
his
was one of them.
his is not the only case. That's right. The Bush family is among them, with a homestead in Paraguay. James Cameron, the filmmaker, owns a whole bunch of New Zealand, and the list goes on and on. So I do this in part because I think we deserve to know what I know. We deserve to know the facts and the models and the projections about climate change. And I don't see anybody else doing that. Yes?
Perfect time for a comment. I'm going to rip off Lao Tzu, some Taoist philosophy a little bit. What we can do is become aware. That's what you're doing. I know a lot more information than I did before I came in here tonight. So the first step is to become aware and then act accordingly. I would also add to that act is right action. And Buddha said that in his 8 tenets. Also, right action. So awareness and then act accordingly. That's the best that we can do, and it's all that we can do, and it's enough. The universe will take care of the rest. If we act in the now, in the present, we make our tomorrows.
Yes, I agree. And so awareness is that first step, and awareness is not nirvana. Awareness is a curse.
Yes.
Oh, I forgot to mention something. Now is probably the wrong time. But I don't know if you remember this first slide. It has an asteroid.
Yeah.
And it's supposed to remind me to tell you that there are 2 kinds of people in the world. Those who categorize people into 2 kinds of people. Oh, no, not that. There are people who want to know. They want to know everything. They want to be fully aware. And then there are people who don't want to know anything. If there's an asteroid coming, they don't want to know about it until they're dead. So don't tell me a thing. Others of us want to know, and I want to be out there staring the damn thing down. When it hits, it better hit me in the nose. That's me, so I assume that's you. But I was supposed to start by saying, if that's not you, now would be a good time to leave. Now is a bad time to leave. Because now you all know. It's like that Louis C.K. routine where he's talking to his 3-year-old daughter. And his daughter keeps asking him questions, finally gets frustrated, and he says, because at some point the sun will blow up and kill us all. And so his 3-year-old, before the conversation started, didn't know anything. And now she knows everything. And I feel the same way. You know, now you know everything. You know that you're going to die, and so is everybody else. But you knew that anyway. So it's not a big surprise you're not 3 years old.
Well, could you talk a little bit more about the northern hemisphere versus the southern hemisphere?
You're not depressed enough yet? Jesus, what does it take with you people?
What do you consider this, how much longer do you
There's a big
Oh, I think it's gone. Yeah. I had an answer for that. Let's see. Malcolm Light did this analysis for the Arctic Methane Emergency Group on the 9th of February 2012. And it's disturbing to me that this is sort of stuff that is in my head. And in it, he concluded that all life on Earth would be extinct by 2047, plus or minus a few years. And he said 2031.6, plus or minus 13 years in the northern hemisphere. 2047, plus or minus a similar number of years in the southern hemisphere. So that's for all life on Earth, so that's 16 years. 16 years difference. And I think he's wrong. I don't think we can kill everything. I see no way that we can manage to kill everything by 2047. So, if it's 16 years for all life, how much is it for human life? I don't know. Is it 10 years? Is it 15? I don't think anybody really knows.
But I mean, you decided to move to New Mexico.
Yeah, that was stupid, remember? Oh. I love the way they keep grinding that in, though. You were really stupid. Let's bring that up again. What is with you people, anyway? You say I'm stupid and then you laugh about it. That's a little disturbing. And that guy who wasn't the psychologist left. Apparently to go get one for the whole of you.
So if this end game comes to pass when and as you expect, what will you do? Will you wait around to starve to death with everyone else, or do you have a plan for yourself? Is there a point?
You people are nasty to me. And you ask me these weird questions. You're just macabre. That's what you are. What am I going to do? Well, I suspect where I live, at some point temperatures will rise to a high enough level that it will denature proteins in all the plants. That's like 125 or 130 degrees Fahrenheit. And that will denature the proteins in all the plants, so all the plants will die. And then where I live, the spring winds are horrific. You know, starting like in February and March, it's like 40 and 50 mile an hour winds every day, and it's really quite unpleasant. Well, imagine if there's no plants. Thousands of people died in the Dust Bowl in this country, choking to death, literally, on dust. So that's everybody I know in the valley I live in.
And you'll wait for that to happen as opposed to taking your own life.
What's it take to get a drink in this place? It's difficult for me to imagine a scenario in which I would commit suicide. There's a A young guy named Daniel Drumright who wrote an essay at Nature Bats Last maybe a year ago. It was 11,300 words, which is a lot, especially in Twitter Nation where 140 characters is considered too many. It was 11,300 words, and it was just this journey, it's this ride, of despair and utter hopelessness followed by total extinction. Just up and down, and it was horrifying. And I can summarize that essay in 3 words. Starvation, predation, suicide. That's all he said. 11,300 words. 11,297 more than it took me. I don't see myself committing suicide. I eagerly anticipate seeing the comeback of the living planet, if only for a few weeks or months. I think it will be awesome to see the end of industrial civilization. And yes, it'll kill me. Way sooner than it's going to kill almost anybody else on the planet. Already 5 million people a year die early deaths because of climate change, and people ask me, when is it going to start? If you're the families of those 5 million people, it already started. So it's already underway. I look forward to the living planet making a comeback no matter how briefly. So I can't imagine I would kill myself. However, there are a lot of people who have that in mind for me. So I might not escape the bullet just yet.
Sometimes I think it's good that people are ignorant, because if everybody were as aware as we are now, then there might be panic. And I know you oppose it a collapse of the system. There's always that viewpoint. That's not my point of view. Bring it on so we can all get to a better place or something. But I just sometimes like I was reading today, the stock market's going up. It's like they're all like in La La Land, but maybe it's good. Like, people in California aren't freaking out. They're not all moving somewhere because, it's the biggest drought in 500 years. They're thinking, oh, it's raining now, how great,
Right, so you're sort of parroting the government and corporate media approach. Just don't tell them anything that matters.
Well, yeah, I guess I am.
Keep them sheeple.
Yeah, because...
And they'll be fine, because ignorance is bliss.
Yeah.
Why do we have a fourth estate? Why do we have a media, if not to inform? Why do we have governments, if not to lead? I hate it when people tell the truth. That's supposed to be my job.
I love being here because I'm so depressed about all this stuff. That it's great to have somebody like,
Yeah, I generated a whole community of like-minded people.
It's like, oh, somebody else is carrying it, I don't have to carry it.
People ask me all the time when I'm done, do you own stock in Jim Beam? Because I really want to drink now. Yes, Robin?
So, this collapse, if we can bring it on, that paper by Brandon Warner, is there, sorry, children, there's sort of thought, he says he did a mathematical model of coupled human environment systems, and the way the mathematical model is playing out is that if we wait for some top-down answer, it's not coming. And chances are, he says, Earth is fucked. That's it. But the point that's uncertain in his model is the one thing that might make some kind of difference. I don't know if it would be enough to save anybody, but the only thing that might make difference is if there's just a massive bottom-up movement to bring down civilization within the next 5 years. And within the next 5 years, it has to be complete, or there is no hope. And there might already be no hope, but in his model, this is what he came up with. So, how do you feel about bottom-up, bringing it down within the next 5 years? Would there be a way that we could grow enough food for a few Adams and Eves to keep the insanity going?
Debbie Downer finally shows up. I think it's a great idea. Terminating industrial civilization has been foremost on my mind for years. Yes, I think that's ingenious. No, I don't think it'll matter for our species. I think we're already done. We're just walking around to save on funeral expenses. It's not easy to bury a species, you know that? Shit costs money. And we're all about the money. Have you been filming this whole time? I said these horrible things about my on the property. We're gonna have to edit that out, by the way. Thank you all for coming. I'll stay here as long as you want. Again, if you want a copy of Going Dark, come on up.